Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we interview experts from around the world on subjects such as leadership, visibility, presentation skills, and communication challenges. My guest today is Lisen Stromberg of Prism Work. But before I get into introducing Lisen's incredibly impressive bio, I want to remind you that if you're interested in how your presentation skills are stacking up and whether your presentation skills are getting you the results you want, you can take our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where in 4 minutes, you can see where your presentation skills are strong and where a little support might get you the recognition that you want. Lisen Stromberg is an award-winning writer, human capital innovation consultant, and a widely regarded speaker who empowers people and companies to reimagine the future of work through work and life success, work+life success. She's been on stage at numerous high-profile conferences, including TEDx, South by Southwest, and others. Through her consulting business, Prism Work, Lisen and her team partner with companies, leaders, and advocates to ensure women and millennials thrive in the workspace. It's rooted in quantitative and qualitative data. Her culture assessments drive customized solutions to meet the unique needs of companies ranging from global Fortune 500s to tech startups. They also offer 21st century leadership workshops and training to ensure that today's workplace has the necessary skills and insights to thrive in the modern workplace. Lisen is an award-winning independent journalist whose work can be found in the New York Times, Fortune, Newsweek, and other top media outlets. Her book, Work, Pause, Thrive: How to Pause for Parenthood Without Killing Your Career, reveals how trailblazing women disrupted the traditional career paradigm to achieve their personal and professional goals, and how forward-thinking companies create workplaces that enable women to thrive. We had a fascinating conversation talking about what's happening with women, especially the she session of women dropping out of the workplace. We've also talked about the role of fathers and the role of companies, how they can create a company culture that is truly inclusive, even when diversity, equity, and inclusion policies aren't really enough. It was a fascinating conversation. I've learned so much from it. Let's go to the interview. Lisen Stromberg, I'm so happy to have you on Speakers Who Get Results. Welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Well, you've been someone I'm a big fan of yours, so I just love the work that you do. And
back at you, sister.
Yeah, right. So I start all my interviews with the question, if you could interview someone from history, someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
It's such a rich question. Thank you for asking that. And my answer isn't somebody we know in history. My answer is actually someone we don't know in history. I think the untold stories of the men and women in in history to me are what are truly fascinating. So my great-great-grandmother, many, many, many times removed, arrived from England in 1619 to Jamestown, Virginia.
Okay.
And so she was one of the first people to colonize this country. She and her husband, Dr. James Woodson, came to the new land. He was a second son and wasn't going to inherit anything. And she actually was a Quaker. And so she was looking for religious freedom. And the story that we have is that they quote unquote bought land, which really basically means they stole land from First Nation peoples and were tilling the land with tobacco. They had African slaves working on there. So they were certainly part of that first wave of slavery. And in 1622, the land was attacked. Their land was attacked by the First Nation people who were there, the Indians who were there. And her husband, James Woodson, died, but she survived. And she survived by killing off 40, apparently, according to the story, 40 Native people. And how did she do? She saved her two sons. She put one in a coal bin and the other in a potato bin and fought them off, and then went on to have many, many more children with a second marriage. Her story is a story we don't hear about. What I would love to understand, how do you make peace with being a colonizer? How do you make peace how did you survive that? What was your life like there? Did you, what were the relationships with the other women? What were the relationships with the other communities of people living in that environment? The First Nation people, et cetera. The slaves that she had enslaved. What is that story? And who is that woman? And what does that mean for our country? And so for me, it'd be a fascinating interview.
I think that would be really fun. And some of it would be, of course, that I always say that rule number one in speaking is who's listening and, what is their cultural context and what is it that they care about? And I imagine that she would look at you and go, huh? What do you mean? I mean, these aren't people, these are the slaves. And this is what slavery does. This is how you survive and so forth.
Maybe she might have, maybe she didn't. Maybe she, she was Quaker. So perhaps my understanding of, I'm not a Quaker, but my understanding of Quakerism is that's not the approach, that all humans matter. Who knows? It's not just she that's relevant, of course. It's the people that she was colonizing, the land, the First Nation peoples, there's so many others that story we could be involved in. The cultural environment there is so rich.
Yes. It would be really interesting when they finally invent time travel or like a time viewer so that you could go back and look and just see what it was like and what it was like from their point of view, what they were taught and, how they grew up.
Yes. We need those VR goggles, right? Oculus.
Yes, exactly. That's great. Well, Lisa, now what you do, you work on company culture. So it was interesting. We were talking about culture. You work on company cultures. And one of the first things I learned about you is that you wrote a book called Work, Pause, Thrive. Tell us a little bit about the book and then what you're seeing now. What have you seen since that book?
Sure. So I wrote the book in 2015, 2016. It came out in 2017. And I wrote it because at the time and still today, the conversation was, why are we losing so many why aren't there more women in the pipeline to leadership? What's happening to women? Where are they going? And there was this belief that women were opting out and, going home. And frankly, I'm talking about college educated women. That was who my research was done on. I interviewed 186 college educated women and surveyed 1,500 more. And I wanted to understand what were their career trajectories and were we losing them and why? And so my answer was, in fact, that we saw this incredible forcing function. Women, once they had children, really faced barriers in the United States that, frankly, I don't see with my relatives in Norway, just to give that comparative. I did actually analyze the Norway versus the US and what's the difference. I have a cousin who's my exact same age and has 3 children, my 3 children's exact same age. Her career trajectory, her experience, her emotional well-being has been so different to mine. And understand when it comes to her career, and understanding that to me was really kind of important. Why was it different? So here's what I learned. One, that in fact, women's careers and women's ambitions aren't necessarily linear. They're actually much vaster, arguably, broader, if you will. The women I interviewed, again, 186 highly successful women, many of them actually had great ambitions for careers. 72% of the women I interviewed consider themselves very ambitious. But the majority of them actually paused their career. They actually took time out of the paid workforce or downshifted. The interesting thing is the vast majority didn't talk about it. Many of them hid their career pauses because they didn't want to be presumed as not being ambitious. So they were hiding this model of career and family integration. They weren't telling their truth, because the narrative is, if you're not productive all the time, all in all the time, not the ideal worker, which is that person who is, has no obligations outside of work, who can work 24/7, et cetera, then you're not ambitious and you're not committed. And what I learned was, in fact, women have a different model, and their model is actually a model that we're seeing millennial men in particular, really aspiring to. So it's interesting when you asked what happened. Well, the research showed that about 2.1 million women are out of the paid workforce at any given year. Again, college-educated women, to care for family obligations. So when we look right now at the she session, as they're calling it, and looking at what's happening to women's careers right now, my answer is, the truth of the matter is, this is not new. What's different is we're now seeing women who didn't have choices because they either didn't have a partner or didn't have the college education. They're being forced out of the workforce because of caregiving responsibilities. So we had one
let me
group that left.
just pause you for 1 second, because we are recording this in the middle of a pandemic.
Yes.
So this is what the pandemic has shut down. I would be curious, before you go on, if I had asked you this question in January 2020, what has changed since you wrote the book? What would you say compared to what you're saying? We're recording this in January 2021.
So there's a couple of things that have changed. Companies have begun to recognize that offering meaningful paid parental leave is actually a retention tool. Particularly I live in Silicon Valley, and particularly in the tech world, we're seeing that, but in many other industries, we're really seeing. And so what we're seeing is where women in the United States used to get, if they were lucky, 6 weeks paid vacation, assuming they worked for a corporation over 50 people that offered it, which, by the way, is not that many women in this country. The vast majority don't work for those companies. They would have, 6 weeks. And nationally, we don't have a national paid leave policy. In fact, we're one of 2 countries, part of the UN, that don't offer it. There's 190 countries in the UN, and we're one of 2 that don't offer it, don't offer paid parental leave on a national basis. The other country is Papua New Guinea.
Oh, goodness.
Right. So what's changed in the years since I wrote my book, and the years since, it came out in 2017 and by 2020, was literally in those short years, we saw companies stepping up and actually starting to offer meaningful paid parental leave. And we were seeing younger women actually stay in the paid workforce. So we were seeing a change in the trend, which was incredibly exciting. They had children, or babies, but they weren't leaving because they, didn't have an option. We're also seeing men take more paid leave. They wouldn't take it before, either because they weren't offered it or because they were worried the implications it meant for their careers. Oh my God, are they not the ideal worker? And in fact, we're seeing more men take it. So that's wonderful. A year later, on the national level, we're seeing a couple of things. One, when we talk about Biden's inauguration, we're seeing a real commitment to potentially offering paid parental leave for all Americans, a national paid policy. So in 4 years, if we meet in 4 years from now, we may be able to boast about that. We're finally catching up to 190 other countries in the world. But difference, I think, is also that we're now beginning to focus on childcare as a priority. The reason women leave the paid workforce, full stop, is childcare challenges, right?
Yeah.
This is what's keeping them. And what we saw in this, what we're seeing in the She section in the midst of this pandemic, is that those women, those non-college educated women who don't have any other option and don't have childcare solutions, are being forced out because they have they have no other options with their children. Yeah. So perhaps 4 years from now, a new conversation, it won't be about maternity leave or paternity leave. It'll be about childcare solutions.
Ah, very interesting. That's very, and one of the things that I found is really interesting about that is how you manage taking care of the family, and that's been disparaged by so many people.
Sure. Motherhood bias is absolutely real.
Yeah.
I teach at Stanford University on a class on leadership, and an amazing professor there, Shelley Koval, has done extensive research on motherhood bias. Take two resumes, Jane A, Jane B, exact same resumes. The only difference is you do list at the bottom of your hobbies or interests or volunteer work, and you say PTA president or PTA involved in some way, shape, or form.
That's the Parent-Teacher Association.
Parent-Teacher Association. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. If you take those two exact same resumes, and the only difference is an indication that one of them is a parent, you see a dramatic difference in employers being willing to hire Jane B, the parent, their willingness to consider Jane B leadership potential. And they even, if they are going to hire him, they're going to hire Jane B, they're going to offer her less money, to the tune of about 24%. No difference in these resumes. That is motherhood bias embedded. And so, yeah, that's real.
Yeah. And it's one of the reasons why women are still being paid less than men, and why women are not advancing as fast, because this whole bias of, oh, well, she's taking time off, or for that matter, the companies are not having the pipeline of qualified women because you have the ones who drop out to take care of the children.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Although I think one thing we are seeing that's different from when my book came out is more and more women are getting beyond those early childhood years, which are the key years that we see women drop out, and are managing to not drop out. I call it pause, because I think dropout is a judgment. Pause is just a temporary moment in your career. The vast majority of women I interviewed actually relaunched to great success. No one talks about that truth, right? How incredibly agile and innovative and trailblazing these women are. We're seeing more and more women rise into leadership. So in fact, we're seeing a huge sea change. 4 years from now, I think white women, we're going to have a different story when we talk about the success of white women. We're still not seeing it for women of color, particularly Black women or Latinas. So,
Lisen, I've heard you say that diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in corporations are not working. And this is why you founded your company, Prism Work. So why aren't they not working? It's supposed to be a good thing, right?
Well, that's such a big question, Elizabeth. So let's deconstruct it a little bit. Okay. I would actually say that initiatives for white women are working. We're starting to see some real breakthroughs for women in the C-suite. And what's really exciting is we're seeing so many accountability partners forcing that function. So for example, BlackRock will not, which is a major private equity firm, will not invest in a company unless they have a women in leadership and women on the board. NASDAQ just announced that they're now going to require diversity metrics where you have to have a woman on your board to be placed on NASDAQ. In the state of California, where I live, we now have a law that says if you're a certain size company, you have to have at least one, I think it might be up to 3 women on your board, depending on your size.
So I believe it was one woman by the end of last year.
Yes.
Or no, by the end of 2019, and 3 by the end of, I think, 2021. So
I believe you. I thank you for having clarity on that. Thank you. But the point is, we're seeing these forcing functions. But when you actually look at who's benefiting from those dynamics, in most cases, it's white women. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, what we're really that's code for How is it supporting other diverse voices? And unfortunately, oftentimes it comes down to how are we supporting let me be clear, how are we supporting African Americans, Latino, et cetera. So the problem with these conversations is that they end up being code for a lot of things that we need to deconstruct. Mm-hmm. What I look at as, are we creating cultures of belonging? Because you can have all of the diversity metrics and diversity objectives in the world, but if you're not creating an environment, and you can hire like crazy, but if you're not creating an environment where the people, those diverse talents want to stay, if you're not creating an environment of belonging, you're going to see them leave. So these problems is, we've been having these for years, right? People come in, they hire, there's a campaign to hire Black people, let's just say. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's successful. They actually they're actually able to change it. But if you actually track that over time, you see them leaving. And the reason they're leaving is that they're not in an environment where they can thrive. And so the work we do is actually partnering with these companies that actually help them look at their culture, understand what are those leverage points, what can they do differently to actually create environments where people are truly thriving. And it's complex, it's not easy.
It is a big thorny problem. And I did a podcast last year, it was in June, with Lance Dorsey from McKesson, who is very much in the diversity and inclusion thing. And he said, you have to be proactive. So there's a pushback to saying, well, just let merit rise. But that doesn't work, does it?
No, unfortunately, merit doesn't work because it's presumed in the fact that it's a level playing field, right?
And it's not a level playing field.
It's not a level playing field. If it was a level playing field, meritocracy would work, but it's not. So we have to kind of unpack that and understand what's really going on around that. But proactive is interesting. So our work
intentional, I think really was the word. Proactive and intentional.
Well, you can be proactive and intentional and do all these wonderful things, but if you don't actually have leadership sending the message that this is a priority, sending a message this is deeply believed in the bones of that leadership, and it's embedded in the DNA of the company. It goes across all the governance, from how we hire, how we promote, how we manage team meetings, how we handle remote working, at how we reward. Starbucks just announced that you can't get your bonus if you don't actually meet certain diversity metrics. I mean, there's so many ways to lever, to turn the levers on this whatever. I'm thinking of Oz and this problem. Thank you.
Yes, this challenge. Let's put it this: it's a challenge.
But there are levers, and you can be intentional about it. But if you don't have senior leadership who really, in their bones, understands why this benefits them, why this benefits the business, why this is the new way to lead in this new world of work, and the way we were taught to lead doesn't work anymore, you're not going to succeed.
Yeah. So it is a lot of work. Tell us a little bit more about what you do then. How can we do something about it? I always want to say, how can you fix it? But fix is too simple because it's a big, complicated issue. So how could we, besides hiring Prism Work, how can we help untangle this thorny problem?
Well, look, I'd win the Nobel Prize for peace and a whole host of other things if I had the answers. So let's start there.
Okay, where can we start? Let's put it that way.
Thank you for that. We think it's a two-pronged approach is the one that makes the most sense. What we do is we actually look at how are you operating inside out and outside in? What does your brand external messaging say, right? And every company is a brand, whether they're B2B or B2C. So what's your branding look like? How are you engaging with the external world? What is the message, your website, your social media, your PR, your advertising, whatever it is, what is that saying to the world? What does your internal culture in terms of your employee sentiment and experience look like? We have a proprietary assessment that we do around that. What is your governance policy, programs, et cetera? How does that measure on the continuum of 21st century best in class? Where are your governance metrics? Where could they be? And then lastly, what's your leadership belief system? How are they operating? What are the messages they send? So we have we call it the Hearty workplace, and Hearty stands for the six attributes that we know to be effective in this new this kind of modern work world. And that is humility, empathy, accountability, resiliency, transparency, inclusivity. And we know that if workplaces and cultures and leaders aren't completely aligned on those things, you're going to have a rub. Somewhere there's going to be a problem. Somewhere something's going to come out. You're going to have a Me Too moment. You're going to have a Black Lives Matter fail. You're going to have employee activism like never before. You're going to have external customers saying, no, that's not working. You're going to have investors saying, you're not doing it right. I'm not investing in you. Supplier diversity. Many of our clients are dealing with the fact that the companies are trying to supply to are saying, well, you're not diverse enough. We don't want to work with you. So the leverages that are happening right now, to me, are incredibly exciting. But how, if you're a company trying to tackle this, what do you do? So that's what we do. We actually work with the companies that are trying to figure this out.
This is wonderful. This is really so exciting. I always think of it when people say, why do they have to legislate something like that? Is because if you're trying to fix something that is really unconsciously embedded, having a penalty would help. And I always think of it like seatbelts. So I am old enough to remember when the law requiring seatbelts came in. And we had people, I was actually in a carpool going to school, and one of the fathers in the carpool had tied the seatbelts so that you could not use them. So they couldn't use them because it was restricting his personal freedom.
Yeah, it's like masks.
Yeah. Well, he was a major egotist. Let's put it that way, which I was too young to know that.
On the Hearty spectrum.
Not humble on the Hearty scale. But when the country passed a law requiring seatbelts, people complained. People said it was, restricted their personal freedom. But traffic deaths went down, and now we take it for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, I think we want to use everything in our arsenal to make change. And yes, I think that in certain cases, legislation really does, as you've given a beautiful example, can truly be to the benefit of humanity. Money talks. And if you are trying to close a deal and you're trying to close a deal with Facebook, and Facebook says, hey, you white company, you white advertising agency, you white furniture supply company, you white law firm, if you want to work with us, you're going to have more diversity because a bunch of white males aren't going to serve our business right. You can be damn sure that company, that agency, that law firm, that furniture supply company, they're going to look and say, I got to do something different. So I think that the leverages we have can be applied in a variety of ways. And many, many, many business leaders have the tools within it, not just to impact their own companies, but to look at how they can impact others. To me, and I'm starting to see that. Oh, it's just so exciting to see the change that we're starting to see. Leaders saying, wait a minute, not only can I work on my own company, but I can actually impact the companies I work with. And it can be downstream and upstream. That's where real change starts happening.
That's where real change starts happening. I think that's got to be our ending, our quotable quote here. Lisen Stromberg, it's been such a joy to have you as a guest on Speakers Who Get Results. If there's one thing we can start with, people who are listening to this, how can we start? I know I'll be posting lots more information about you in the show notes, but if you're just listening while you're driving, what's one thing you could do to start?
I really think it's great to get self-aware, right? Mm-hmm. Let's start with ourselves and build from self out. Understanding your own, I think everyone's a leader, by the way. 5-year-old girls are a leader, 60-year-old men are leaders. Let's really open our eyes to what leadership is. For the very least, we're leaders to our own lives. How are you navigating those core traits? How are you humble or not? How are you empathetic or not? Where is accountability in your life? Are you resilient? If not, why? Transparency, what are you willing to reveal? What are you holding back? What are you not comfortable with? Inclusivity, does that belief system work for you? Why? Why not? Understanding those core behaviors, which I think are the element of success in the 21st century, that would be a great place to start.
Oh, thank you, Lisen, so much. I've been an honor and a delight to have you as my guest. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. And I want to remind you that if you are interested in seeing how your presentation skills stack up, you can take our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are strong and where maybe a little support could help you get the recognition and the visibility that you want. This has been Elizabeth Bachman. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.